She also says that every year on the anniversary of the attack, she drops a yellow taxi toy cab in the reflection pool at Ground Zero to commemorate Dave and to remind him that she still loved him. And here's the wild part, like, Dave is a real person, but he never knew Tania. So every year, there's poor Dave in the afterlife scratching his head saying, why can't I remember this bitch? Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things, a weekly variety podcast that gives you just enough information to stand your ground at any social gathering. We explore stories from the darker corners of true crime, the annals of your old unread history books, and the who's who of extraordinary people. I'm your ringmaster this week, Kyle Risi.
And I'm your circus stripper for this week, Adam Cox.
How's that going to go down with the kids?
It's an adult circus.
Actually, talking about adult circuses, I was going to buy Phoebe, our friend Phoebe, a children's book that I came across called Ben's Big Load. And basically, Ben has this big truck and it's got this big giant white load on the back of it. And he's desperate to empty it and no one will take his load. Eventually, he does find a guy up in the mountains.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a guy... Ralph, yeah. He's basically the guy who likes to close the fridge with his hips.
Okay.
And yeah, he takes his load.
Right. I'm guessing it's a book of just a lot of innuendo, right?
A lot of innuendo. You could read it to a kid and it would just go straight over the head. Except
on the last page when there's a giant penis.
Yeah. Do you know how like Spotify do their Wrapped around about the new year, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Tesco's, our supermarket, has started doing one as well. Have you seen this?
Like all your club card points, what they go on.
Exactly. What your top 3 most purchased items, what your meal deal of choice is, and how that compares to the general public. I found ours.
What is it?
Let me quiz you. What's the 3rd most purchased item?
God, I mean, milk's on there every week.
You'd be wrong.
Tomatoes?
I've got the props here.
The props.
Item number 3, and of course, our listeners can't see this, so you're going to have to describe it.
Well, it's a tin of tuna.
It's a tin of tuna, basically.
I'm assuming they're including like 4 tins in one pack.
Probably not. It's just tuna. Okay. Item number 2. Do you want to have a guess?
Okay. I still think it's milk, but I'm guessing it's not milk.
It's not milk.
Toothpaste.
Nope. You won't be surprised by this. I hate the fact that you buy this because you always open up 5 in one go.
Oh, protein yogurt.
Protein yogurt.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so we're going to come to number 1, and I don't know how I feel about this. What do you reckon?
It's got to be bloody Snacker Jacks, because that was on the list a lot last year.
No.
Avocados?
Nope.
I have no idea.
Here we go. What the fuck?
Onions.
I
mean, yeah, sometimes I will buy like 3 at a time, and then I realize I've got 3 in the cupboard.
Yeah. That's the number 1 item.
Wow.
But there is a whole subreddit called Tesco where people have been sharing their most purchased items. And I was actually like humbly proud of our top 3 items.
Yeah, then none of them are like sweets or anything like that.
Exactly. Adam, the things that are on people's lists are just outrageous. This person's number 1 purchase item was a 2-litre bottle of Coke.
Ew.
362 bottles of Coke that they bought in a year. That's crazy. And then the second one was pot noodle. And then number 3 was a 1.75 litre bottle of Coke. So they alternated between the big bottle and the small bottle. And then we're sitting here with bloody a can of tuna, fromage frais, and a bloody white onion.
To be fair, I could make a meal with that, high in protein.
That's true.
And a little bit oniony.
Aren't you proud of that?
I am. I eat all those things.
We do eat all those things, but onion's just weird. I guess it's just in so many things. But when you look at the categories of what we bought, number 1 category was salads and antipasties. Then we had dairy, which is the second biggest category. Then frozen vegetables. And then just fresh vegetables was the 4th category. And these are all things I'm really proud of.
Well, I'm the one that does the shop. So if anything, I should be proud of that. And you're gloating to the rest of the listeners going, hey, we're healthy. Are you?
But I didn't even realize we were. I thought we were really unhealthy. But then we also see our meal deals, and there was 2 meal deals on there. Your meal deal was clearly a chicken sandwich, 2 eggs.
Chicken triple. No, it's not eggs.
Well, I mean, it was chicken sandwich, eggs, and a bottle of water. And mine was a salad, a pasta salad, 2 eggs, and a bottle of water.
I never buy eggs. That must be yours.
It must be mine then. Yeah, maybe it's me who's alternating. Crazy. Anyway, Adam.
This has almost become all the latest things, Cal. Careful.
Freaks. This is just a reminder that All the Latest Things is now its own episode. If you've been wondering why you haven't heard one in a while, that's the reason. And now you can listen to All the Latest Things free on Patreon. Just sign up as a free member after you finish this episode. And don't forget, signing up also gives you early access to next week's episode a full 7 days before anyone else. If you've managed to devour all of our free content and are craving more, you can become a certified freak to unlock all of our upcoming episodes. And please, don't forget, leave us a review on your favorite podcasting app. Your support really helps us reach more freaks of the show. But Adam, today's compendium, we are diving into an assembly of stories that show how compassion can both be our strength and our vulnerability.
Yeah, I've got nothing.
This week, I'm actually going to be telling you a story about a woman called Tania, who miraculously survived the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center in New York back in 2001. And her story ended up shining out amongst all the other survival stories because of her vivid recounting of how she barely escaped from the South Tower. But also, she lost a fiancé who was in the North Tower as well. Now, her story was by far the most traumatic. Because of this, it was easy for her to emerge as the most triumphant and resilient symbols of what it meant to be a 9/11 survivor. In fact, she was considered a hero because at the time, they weren't getting what they needed in terms of like support and stuff for the fact that they lost their family members. But then in 2007, it was revealed that she had actually never been to the World Trade Center and that her whole story was a complete fat lie.
Hang on. What? So she got all this support and all this coverage.
Yeah.
Only for
And
6 or 7 years later, they then found out actually she'd been lying the whole time.
She was lying the whole time.
So was she benefiting from this? Was she getting money? What was going through her head?
Adam, she wasn't actually making any money from this. If anything, it just seems to have been about her building these human connections for the first time in her life and then getting high as a consequence from the fame and the recognition that she got from that in return. And obviously, while Tania earns a spot amongst our female scammers that we've tackled in the past, her story is really tricky and really different to kind of any other scammer story that we've come across because she wasn't really looking to profit from it.
Yeah, but obviously we'll get into it, but I just feel like that was a disastrous event, which it changed the world.
Sure.
And it sounds like if she's lonely or just trying to make friendships and connections, then there's other ways of doing that.
True. And I've got a few explanations that we'll get onto later on as to what her motivations might have been. But today I'm going to be telling you the story of Tania Head, the woman who was never there. So her story is a really tricky one to navigate because she did bring a lot of good to the Survivors Network, but it's also bad because everything good that she did was pretty much built on this cruel lie. Tania did eventually grow to genuinely believe her own lies. She had fabricated the truth in such vivid detail that she immersed herself in it. And the condition that psychologists say she had was something called like pseudologica fantastica, where a person's pathological lies end up blurring that sense of reality as they keep repeating it time and time again. But essentially our story starts about 18 months after the September 11th attacks on a Yahoo forum when a group was formed called the World Trade Center United Family Group. And it was formed by the families and the survivors affected by the events of 9/11 as a way to provide mutual support and comfort to family members dealing with loss. And also, on top of that, to share information about recovery efforts, victim identification, and various memorial plans that were kind of being undertaken at the time across the United States. But most importantly, this group was set up to advocate for the interests of the victims of the families in the aftermath of the attack, which, believe it or not, had to really scream just to be heard because they just weren't getting what they needed from the authorities. In 2003, a woman called Tania joined the group and posted a thread sharing her story. At first, her story was pretty vague. Initially, it said that she was in the South Tower and that she had managed to escape somehow. But as vague as this first initial post was, it instantly attracted a lot of welcoming messages and sympathy from other members. And this was enough to encourage her to continue to post more and more, drip feeding in more about her story. Slowly from there, her story started to become increasingly more detailed, talking about how she had to climb over people's dismembered body parts and at one point physically climbing over a pile of dead bodies.
I mean, why would you make that up?
That's what's crazy here. Like, we now know that this is a bullshit story. So when you hear this, you go, why would you say stuff like that?
Yeah. In some ways, it's interesting that you told us up front because you could have led me on and then I'd have been like, what?
Well, I initially wanted to frame Tania's lie as this massive twist in the story, revealing that it was all a lie later on. But the thing is, though, in order for me to do that, I would have need to have kind of recounted her exact story, which I realized I just wasn't comfortable giving what she had actually said any meaningful airtime, especially knowing that it was all nonsense.
I'm guessing, has she used, because she wasn't in the tower, pieces of other people's information and stories to kind of almost, build her own story?
100%. This is the thing. She's a massive story topper and she's constantly A/B testing her story as well.
A/B testing.
Seriously, that's it. And the thing is, though, it becomes very clear that amongst all the other survival stories in the group, her story was the most extreme compared to anything else that anyone else had shared. So she was slowly kind of embellishing her story to kind of polish it up as time went on. Basically, this is what she said. She said that on the day of the 9/11 attack, she was working in the South Tower on the 78th floor for a company called Merrill Lynch, when all of a sudden she heard a noise of the first plane hitting the North Tower. As she looked out the window, she saw flames, of course, erupting from the building. In that moment, she immediately thought of a fiancé who was in the North Tower and started counting the floors from the top down to see if he was on one of the affected floors. She knew pretty quickly he was on one of the floors that the plane had hit. She says that as she was coming to terms with this, someone started screaming that there was another plane coming. And then, before she knew it, there was a massive explosion. She said all she remembers is being flung through the air being sucked out of her lungs and then hitting a marble wall. When she then came around, her back and her arms were on fire, which she then goes into detail describing how she could smell her own skin cooking.
So I weren't quite sure when you say on fire as in like, when your muscles are on fire, but no, she was burning
She
alive.
was literally burning, yeah. She then goes on to say that a man wearing a red bandana, whose name will later be identified as Wells Crowther, extinguished the flames on her, hugged her, told her to stay awake, and then went off to find a fireman who could then carry her to safety.
Was he a real person?
Yes.
Okay.
He is a real person. Put a pin in him because he's very important to the story. Now, eventually, a fireman does find her. He takes her in his arms. As he's doing that, a dying man reaches out to her and begs her to take his wedding ring and give it back to his wife. She takes the ring, and then the fireman takes her downstairs where he manages to roll her underneath a fire truck just as the South Tower collapses.
So what floor was she on?
78th floor.
78th floor. And do you know what floor the plane hit on the South Tower?
I'm not quite sure. We know that other people did escape because we know that 18 other people did escape from that region.
Wow, okay.
She says that following this, she passes out and she wakes up 6 days later in a hospital bed where she's told that her fiancé Dave had just died in the collapse of the North Tower. So fucking heartbreaking, man. But we also know this is not true.
I know, because I almost got wrapped up in it in terms of her, like this being her story. But the thing is, this is someone else's story, if that makes sense.
So she then goes on at length about how she was left completely bereft and rendered totally immobile by what had happened, not wanting to live anymore. This went on until Thanksgiving when she started to question why God had allowed her to survive when so many others had died. Eventually, she says that she comes to the realization that the reason why God had saved her was so that she could go off and help other people. So when she gets out of hospital, she has this whole renewed kind of sense of hope for her life moving forward. She returns the wedding ring to the widow of the man who had given it to her. And she says that's when she found and joined the World Trade Center United Family Group. She says it wasn't to get any attention or sympathy for herself. Instead, it was to graciously help other people piece back together their lives in the same way that she had started to do.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Has she ever experienced any tragedy in her life, which is what this, spurred her to this kind of forum?
It's an interesting question. She does have some kind of scarage on her arm and her back. How she got that, we don't know. And it did make me question whether or not something bad did happen to her, because she certainly wasn't in the South Tower when it collapsed.
Yeah.
So maybe something had happened in her childhood.
So I'm just trying to think why she would join this. If she did have very good intentions to help people and just connect with people that were suffering, maybe she went through some kind of trauma herself, is what I'm thinking. But...
Possibly, but there's no indication that she did. And the thing is, though, with this story, I can't quite tell if it sounds fake because I know it's fake. Because for people hearing this story and the incredible detail that she goes into, they believe it and they were extremely moved by it. And I guess it's because no one would ever think someone would be so bold to lie about something so devastating, especially in the big way that she did. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as the story starts striking a chord within the group, she garners like this immense amount of sympathy. She gets underway, becoming kind of this pillar of support within this little tiny community, and people end up really, really loving her. And she did truly inspire many people to pick up the pieces of their lives and look forward, spending countless hours listening and comforting people. She would strongly just emphasize what it meant to be a survivor, like leading by her example.
It's really weird because I'm kind of like, oh, that's really good of her. Even though she got like a positive reaction. If she was trying to console me,
Yep.
and then I found this out,
yeah, you'd be devastated.
I think I would be devastated, but I guess I've kind of, she's helped me get better.
Yep.
But I'm going to be like, hang on a minute. And I question everything.
But at the same time, remember, she's also acting like this emotional vampire, draining as much sympathy as she could for her own supposed suffering whenever kind of the opportunity arose. Her offering of support within the group was extremely conditional. Her dynamic was built on offering comfort and encouragement, but only if there was this kind of reciprocal outpouring of sympathy to her in return. So whenever she didn't get that, she would then try to embellish a story just a little bit, adding a new dramatic twist to try and overshadow other people's experiences, trying to make their story seem a little bit inferior to hers. She's a classic story topper, and we all know people like that. Do you know what I mean?
They're like, oh, I can better that story.
Exactly. And if that didn't work, which was rare, she would occasionally lash out at people, forcefully reminding them that what she had gone through was far more traumatic than anything any of them could ever imagine.
All right, back in your box, Tania.
Even though she tells everyone that she's working full time, in reality, she wasn't working at all. She was literally just spending her entire day completely immersed in this group. Her involvement became something more tangible when she starts organizing in-person gatherings. And at these in-person meetings, they would sit like in a circle, not too dissimilar to like an AA meeting, and they would take turns sharing. But when it was Tania's turn, her contributions would often feature these total meltdowns with her acting out these vivid flashbacks. And I know this is meant to be a tragic setting, but I can't help giggle at that image of her delivering this really over-the-top dramatic monologue, just like you might see from someone like a GCSE drama.
Yeah, or it reminds me, and it's not the same, but it almost feels like a bit of a character from a Little Britain or sketch show, someone that always wants to have the attention on her. That's kind of what I'm picturing here. Take the story outside of it. You've got someone who's just quite self-absorbed.
Really, like a Marjorie Dawes.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But obviously to the people that are in that room at that time,
they're probably like,
they're just like,
you're so
jaws
brave.
on the floor.
Yeah.
Exactly. Eventually, though, her story is brought to the attention of a guy called Jerry Bogazza.
I mean, why start pronouncing names correctly now?
I know, right?
That's fine.
But basically, he survived the North Tower, and he was actually the founder of another online support group called the World Trade Center Survivors Network, which at the time had around about 500 members. So he reaches out to Tania, they arrange to meet, and just like everyone else, he feels this an immense amount of sympathy towards her. In retrospect, though, he does admit that he does have a few doubts, especially after she shows him the scars on her back and her arms. Like, to him, they just didn't really look like burn scars at all. But of course, he takes her word for it. After all, no one, like I said, would imagine anyone would make this stuff up. But then also put themselves in the center of this community, primed for potentially being exposed almost every single day.
Yeah, it's just, even though you might have your doubts or you think maybe the story's embellished, I don't think you'd ever question her like to that degree.
But at the same time, no one wants to be that dick, right?
Yeah.
That questions a 9/11 survivor.
That lost her husband or fiancé.
Exactly. So the two of them, they become really close friends. He's incredibly protective of her because obviously he's, by this point, seen firsthand the horrific flashbacks and the emotional meltdowns that she would have, while at the same time still appearing to force herself to show this incredible degree of strength and support to other people. Eventually, Jerry started to recognize the impact that Tania was having, not only in supporting the other members of the group, but also in raising awareness as an activist. So he decides to invite her to form a sort of bridge between their two networks, where she agrees to take on a more prominent role of support. And thanks to her and her story, the network starts holding bigger and bigger, more frequent in-person meetings. And in a relatively short period of time, the network just doubles in size. So they are genuinely helping a lot of people. And Tania smashes it. She truly embodies what it meant to be a 9/11 survivor, a widow, and an activist. So she's like a triple threat. She exudes this charm, this positivity about her. She has this really enduring kind of Spanish accent. And despite obviously her supposed trauma, she seems to ease people's suffering as long as, of course, as we know, they didn't eclipse her own, which, to be honest, didn't happen very often.
Yeah, I can imagine, again, shouldn't joke, but imagine being at a meeting and then someone obviously reveals some new information and then she's like, and then there was this dog, which I picked up and rescued.
Oh, God.
So I was like, oh, I need to beat that.
She does lie about a dog.
Does she?
I'll get onto that in a minute. One of her earliest achievements was getting the Survivors Network officially recognized as a legal entity. She also manages to secure a bunch of state funding. Even more poignantly, she organizes a visit to Ground Zero for all the members, like giving them finally their first chance to actually grieve at the original site of 9/11. And like I said, objectively, she does a lot of good. She donates a ton of her own money, proving obviously she wasn't profiting in any way. That's what makes the story so complicated. While the foundation of her life was built on a lie, fraud or not, Tania was objectively a force for good, despite bleeding people for attention. Now, a really big part of her story was, of course, that she had lost her fiancé Dave in the North Tower. This part of her story really feels like it's just been lifted straight out of a romantic comedy. Basically, she says they met one night outside the World Trade Center when he actually stole her cab.
Right.
Apparently, she was furious at him, but he just kept flirting, insisting they go out on a date. She finally agrees, and from there they fall in love, move in together, and eventually they elope to Hawaii. Tania claims that she came home one evening from a really stressful day at work to find a trail of rose petals leading to the kitchen. At the other end of it was Dave standing there in a coconut bra, dancing the hula, and then he presented her with 2 tickets to Maui for the very next day. When they arrived, apparently her parents were supposedly waiting for them. Dave had flown them in from Canada. So weirdly, his parents didn't come. Tania says that when they got to the hotel room, there was a beautiful white dress that was waiting there for her, already tailored to her exact measurements. Ultimately, without going into too much detail, the entire story culminates in a surprise civil ceremony on the beach in a circle of white orchids on this Hawaiian island.
Do you know what this reminds me of?
What is it?
You know when Ross and Rachel...
Yes, where Stevie Wonder was sang as she walked down the aisle. And the photographer was Annie Linowicz.
Who didn't put film in the camera.
Would you believe she didn't put any film in the camera? It does. That's what I mean. It sounds like it's lifted from a romantic comedy.
Yeah, she's a little bit... I just don't know. I'm a little bit worried about her health.
She says that the next day they then call all their friends to tell them that they had got Maui'd.
Oh, God.
But because, of course, it was a surprise ceremony, Dave hadn't actually applied for a marriage license because doing so would have spoiled the surprise. So technically, they weren't legally married. However, they were planning on getting married on the 12th of October, 2001, just 1 month after September the 11th.
Well, that's somewhat convenient.
This part of his story featuring Dave is like the cherry on her sundae, you know, like people were incredibly sympathetic towards her. She painted this picture of this unbelievably romantic love story with an equally romantic and caring guy, only to have it all ripped away from her in like a blink of an eye. So you can totally see how people would feel a lot of overwhelming empathy towards someone like that.
Yeah, what I think frustrates me is this story... obviously it's quite elaborate in a way, but then there are going to be other people that would have lost their loved ones and who would actually have been in love, and they might have confided, they might have like supported her because they're like, oh, I want to support you because you're supporting so many other people. So all this attention that she got, I don't care that she helped others. Yeah. That's the bit that just doesn't, you can still help other people without having to lie.
And also, what a betrayal as well. Like, you are at your most broken, and someone is also sharing their heartbreaking story, and you have to muster everything inside of you to also kind of reciprocate that sympathy for them as well. for nothing.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't even real.
And yeah, when actually you probably do want to be a bit self-absorbed and just be about yourself, and you're
What's crazy is that because, of course, they weren't married, she then tells people that her lawyer then arranged for a judge to perform a posthumous wedding for them. And so the day that she signs that paperwork, she became both a wife and a widow all on the same day. So it's like, poor tragic me.
Can that even happen?
No, it can't. But people don't know that, right? They're so preoccupied with their own lives at this moment in time, their own grief. Yeah, like she would need to prove that there was an intent to get married. How is she going to do that?
They don't hand out like posthumous hummus?
Posthumous?
Yeah, like they sometimes do that for Oscars, right? Like awards. This isn't an Oscar, darling.
No,
although maybe you should get one.
She also says that every year on the anniversary of the attack, she drops a yellow taxi toy cab in the reflection pool at Ground Zero to commemorate Dave and to remind him that she still loved him. And here's the wild part, like Dave is a real person. He genuinely existed. He worked on the 100th floor of the World Trade Center, and he did tragically die on September 11th, but he never knew Tania. So every year, there's poor Dave in the afterlife scratching his head saying, why can't I remember this bitch?
So how has she got his, I mean, I guess maybe you would be able to find people's names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just look them up. There's going to be tributes. There's going to be family members sharing pictures of people. There's going to be articles about people. All she needs to do is just take her pick.
I'm feeling less sympathy towards her right now.
Yeah, it's the cruelest part of her story, right? As the years went on, Tania keeps adding more and more embellishments to her story. At this point, she was basically just A/B testing a story for that maximum impact. She starts telling people that on the morning of September 11th, she actually got a call from Dave in the North Tower asking if she wanted to meet up for coffee on the ground floor. She, of course, said that she couldn't because she had a meeting. And then, of course, at 8:46 a.m., the first plane hit the tower. And Tanya's like, if only I'd said yes, we'd both have been down on the street and he would have survived. She also starts telling people that she had lost her wedding ring during the escape. But then Tiffany's had reached out to her and offered to replace it free of charge. So one of her favorite things to do was just go around flashing this ring, proudly telling people that it was a gift from Tiffany's.
Oh my, okay, yeah.
And then she starts telling people that just a few weeks after the attacks, her brother had tragically died on the same day that his wife had given birth to their son. And because they knew how much Dave had meant to Tania, they decided to name the baby Dave.
Okay, so her new nephew is called Dave, but I'm guessing she doesn't have a nephew.
No, she does have two brothers.
And do they know what's going on? Because I imagine one of them getting contacted and like, I didn't die. I'm still alive.
I'm still alive. What are you talking about? I'm right here. What's funny to me is that nobody ever questions her. And the problem with Tania is that she is this chronic story topper. And if you've ever known someone with this kind of compulsion, then you know that their lies always tend to be made up on the spot in direct response to what someone else has said, right? So if you're one of those type of liars, then you're constantly playing this dangerous game because you could say something that ends up backing you into a corner. So a good example of this is when someone tells her about their dog and then on the spot, she just invents a dog called Elvis and talks about how outrageously funny and cute he is. And she does this all the time. But it's like, geez, Tania, this is not a competition. And then there's Tania, they're just going, well, certainly not a close one. Making up all this bullshit.
It reminds me of like a child, like when you're at school and you do kind of lie a bit as a kid and go like, yeah, I've got all the Power Rangers or whatever it might be.
Is that a lie that you told?
Yeah, when I only had two. But that's the kind of thing you do at that age to fit in or whatever. And
she's just someone who just never grew out of it, basically. Of course, later, that same person who she told the story about Elvis to comes and visits her and they're like, where's Elvis? And Tanya's like, who? Oh, yeah. The housekeeper's taken for a walk.
Right.
So like that's another example of how she's such a story topper. And because she tells these stories in the moment, impulsively, she ends up backing herself into a corner, basically.
Now she's got a housekeeper. Now she's got to pretend the house is clean.
I think she did actually have a housekeeper. On two occasions, once in 2004 and again in August 2005, Tania tells people that she's going to help with the tsunami relief in Thailand and then later with Hurricane Katrina. But she doesn't. She just disappears. It's likely that she headed to California or Spain to stay with family, but she says this to reinforce this image of herself as a saintly, selfless person. She really gets off on just being told how like incredible she is, which is really sad.
Yeah, because I thought it sounded like she wanted to help these people in a weird way, but she doesn't And
She just wants an easy ride, though.
Yeah, and like now she's got to do like another good cause. Yeah.
So one of her favorite moves is when she's recounting her bullshit story, she will just like start crying out of nowhere, knowing people will just rally around her to comfort her. And then she'll say things like, why me? Why did I survive? Other people had children and families. I didn't. And then she'll pull that classic fishing line of like, what makes me so special? And then they'll start telling her how amazing she is and how she's fulfilling this higher purpose, helping others. And she just fucking loves it. She really gets off on this. And I guess the people that she surrounds herself with at the time were all still dealing with their own grief. So they weren't really in a position to call her out on her lies. Plus, nobody expects, again, like you keep saying, someone to lie so completely and committedly about something like this. You know what I mean?
Mm.
A good example of this is when a fellow survivor called Brad, who became curious to know a little bit more about Dave, like he really wanted to kind of see what Dave looked like, especially since Tania had never really shown anyone a picture of him. Like a lot of the other family members would carry a photograph of their loved ones in their pocket or their purse. Mm-hmm. But Tania never did this. So it got Brad to wondering. So he started doing a little bit of digging and very quickly he found Dave. There were lots of articles and tributes from family and friends written about him online. Curiously, though, not one of them mentioned a fiancé, and certainly none of them mentioned someone called Tania. And there were, again, plenty of pictures of Dave with friends and family, but not a single one with him and Tania, like the love of his life. And remember, according to her, everyone in their lives knew that they were married.
No. They were married.
Of course. So he starts reflecting on some of the stories that Tania had told, and he noticed that she would often flip-flop between calling Dave her fiancé and her husband. Of course, remember, this isn't really a smoking gun, but he just felt like he had stumbled on something just a little bit shady. But he didn't want to be that dickhead who interrogates a 9/11 survivor, so he just keeps it to himself.
Go and be the dickhead.
Tania was smart enough to never actually share her story directly with anyone who was in a position to be skeptical about her story. She never spoke directly to journalists, and this wasn't out of a lack of trying. Journalists heard her story from other survivors, and so they were desperate to meet with her. But every time a request came in, she always maintained that she just wasn't strong enough to recount her story.
Really? Really, Tania?
Thing is that this is really smart because she knew by saying this, journalists weren't about to push a 9/11 survivor into speaking.
If I was in her support group, I'd be like, oh, really? You tell us every week.
No.
Every week.
So she ends up employing a lot of tools to keep her lies from being revealed. But in spite of this, journalists work as best as they can with the secondhand accounts of her story that they hear from other members. Right?
But is it taking away attention from
100%.
actual, genuine, heartbreaking stories?
Yes!
And people rescuing and whatever it might be? It's just like, I don't know.
I mean, you could argue, do these survivors want the attention in the equal way that she's been getting it?
I wouldn't have thought so.
No.
I can't imagine any of them really want much attention. So I don't know. If people are talking about it and thinking and generating awareness, then do it for those that actually need help and funding for that.
And again, this is the thing, though. She's willing to garner all the attention. It does bring a lot of positive attention for these survivor groups. They do a lot of good. They do get a headway. So again, a lot of people are torn by this because, yes, without Tania, they wouldn't have been the successful network. They wouldn't have raised as much money. They wouldn't have been the activist group that she made them become. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so tricky. But the thing is, though, as time goes on, Tania does start to get a taste for power and she becomes determined to take total control of the survivors network. At this point, the network had a fairly flat structure, so it was just a few members serving on the board of directors. Tania starts clashing more and more with Jerry over how the network was being run. So she starts quietly planting a few seeds of doubt about his decision-making amongst the other members. And then once that sentiment towards Jerry reaches peak, she then presents a list of grievances against him to the wider group. Everyone ends up agreeing. Jerry is forced to resign, and he is kicked out the group altogether. Immediately following this, Tania then implements a brand new structure, appointing herself as the president with total control of the network. And this is where that idea of Tania being a force for good, despite her lies, is starting to fall apart because now she was actively causing actual harm. Jerry, remember, he was an actual 9/11 survivor. He found this network through this desire to have a purpose in this world following what had happened to him. Tania took it all away from him, causing a whole new kind of trauma for him.
Yeah, because if this is helping him deal with things and move on, then what's he doing now?
Not a lot. Yeah. Anyway, now seems like a perfect time to take a quick break. And when we come back, Tania's lies are going to start spiraling out of control and the devastating impact it's going to have for those around her. Hey freaks, if you've been enjoying the show, we've got a small favor to ask.
Yeah, we need your help, and it's super simple, but it makes a massive difference. Last time we asked you guys to leave reviews, the response was overwhelming.
You all really showed up for us, and we loved reading every single one of your reviews. But we've got to keep that momentum going. So, if you're a seasoned Compendium podcast listener, or even if you're new here and you love what you're hearing, could you please take a quick second to leave us a review?
It's super easy. If you're on Spotify, all you got to do is click that star button and give us a 5-star review. Nice and quick, done in like 2 seconds.
But if you're feeling extra generous and you've got a bit more time in your hands, then head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a sweet, thoughtful written review. Trust us, this will go a long way.
Or if you're like, I don't use podcast apps, no worries. You can still show us some love by going to our website, thecompendiumpodcast.com, and leave us a review there. We've made it super easy.
The more reviews we get, the more listeners we can reach, and the better episodes we can bring you. It's a win-win, really.
So yeah, hit that star, leave us a review, and help us grow this amazing community. We appreciate it more than you know.
So, should we get back to the show?
Let's do it.
Okay, Adam, we're back. Tania.
How does it all fall apart? Like Jenga.
Like Jenga.
I just know we're just whipping out those pieces and it's going to all come tumbling down.
So Tania is now in complete control of the Survivors Network. She's ousted poor Jerry. He's coming to terms with what's happened and he has no purpose in this life. Tania is chosen to lead the first ever tour of the Ground Zero Memorial site when it's opened. Of course, this was going to be a massive deal. So naturally, the media were curious about who she was and they started hearing snippets of her story. And before long, journalists were essentially clamoring over themselves to speak with her. So it starts becoming harder and harder for her to deflect these journalists. Like before, her excuse was that she wasn't strong enough. While that worked behind a keyboard, journalists were now approaching her in real life. So Tania, anytime she needed to get out of a tricky situation with journalists, all she needed to do was fake a panic attack or start crying and shaking, and then the other members of the group would instantly just rally around her and just get her the hell out of there. And Tania's main friend in all of this was another member of the network called Linda, who had seen more of these breakdowns than anyone else. One day, Tania told Linda that her therapist had recommended that she start doing this exercise called flooding, which is basically like an exposure therapy. Have you heard of this before?
No.
Basically, this involves Tania recording herself telling her story in graphic, horrific detail and then replaying it over and over in order to help her come to terms with that trauma. But of course, she needed someone to bleed sympathy out of, so she asked Linda to sit with her, supporting her through recording the entire tape and then sitting with her even more as she replayed the tape over and over and over.
Is this actually a tactic that...
It is, but this is just basically something that she's read online.
Right. And is Linda a survivor?
She is. Yeah, so she's got her own trauma.
That's absolutely horrendous.
And this was gruesome. She talks about seeing her own secretary decapitated by a flying piece of sheet metal.
That's new.
She talks about smelling people burning alive, people who were too badly injured to move or do anything about it in order to save themselves. And also she describes the sounds of the people around her just screaming in agony. It honestly sounds like hell. And for months, Linda just sat by her side watching Tania relive this over and over. And I know I giggle there, but it's because I'm nervous because it's just so horrific. It becomes this really traumatizing thing for Linda in return, to the point where she eventually has to tell Linda that as much as she loves her, she just can't do this anymore because she started having these recurring nightmares and it was now starting to affect her own life. She's a 9/11 survivor in her own right.
I completely agree. I don't know how Linda was able to even go through that in the first place. And I'm betting that of all the people that are angry at her, I imagine Linda's one of them.
When Linda tells Tania that she can't do this anymore, Tania just absolutely loses it. She starts screaming at her, telling her that she's selfish, accusing her of being a disloyal friend. She shouts at her. She says, like, you don't realize that my trauma is so much worse than yours.
Did she actually use those words?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
She calls her a terrible person, yet despite all of this, Linda sticks with her throughout it all.
Ditch her, Linda.
So it's around about this time, during these recordings, that Tania starts embellishing her story a bit more. Now, it featured a mysterious man wearing a red bandana, who we mentioned at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
According to her, he was the one who actually put out the flames when she was on fire. Apparently, he hugged her, told her to stay awake, and then ran off to find a fireman to carry her to safety. Now, among the stories from actual survivors, many had spoken about this man with a red bandana who would help them to safety. He would then repeatedly run back into the tower, rescue someone else, until basically he died.
Really? So that's a true story, this guy?
He was a real guy, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, for a couple of years, nobody actually knew his identity, but there was a lot of kind of intrigue around who he was. As a result, he became one of the biggest heroes to emerge from the attacks. And it's said that he saved an estimated 18 people before he was eventually killed. Based on this intrigue, Tania made sure to weave him into her own story.
I guess it helps give some credibility or weave her way into, all the survivor stories.
Yeah.
Wow.
Eventually, it is discovered that his name was Wells Crowther. He was an equities trader on the 104th floor of the South Tower. And when he was finally identified, his family were really keen to connect with other survivors. Of course, Tania was claiming that she was one of them.
Yeah, I guess she was first in line.
Well, actually, that's the thing, though. At first, she was really resistant, saying that in her experience, whenever she met with other families of the victims, she could sense this resentment towards her for surviving when their loved ones hadn't. Isn't that sick?
I don't know. Maybe some people hold resentment, but at the end of the day...
But it's not true, though. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, if she was an actual survivor, I would get it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, though, that part of her story doesn't have maximum impact. So she later changed it, saying that it was too cruel for her to burden the families with the horrors of what she had witnessed, and that it was better that she just shoulder the burden herself.
God.
And again, this is an example of her A/B testing a story, and this works because this just makes her seem like more of a hero.
Wow.
Finally, she does agree to meet with the Crowthers. Naturally, they're extremely generous, especially considering, obviously, her initial reluctance. As a gift, they give her a red bandana, and then she sat down with them over a meal. She looked them all directly in the eye and then told them a completely fabricated story about how Wells had saved her life. It's sick. She told them that she had kept the jacket that he had used to put out the flames on her back, and that she planned to cut out a piece of the burned fabric. She was going to mount on a piece of perspex and promise that she would send it to them. She also says that she had a framed photograph of him in every single room of her house so that she could always feel safe by looking directly into his eyes.
Oh, no. I've had enough of this woman. Who's pulling the rug out because she needs her comeuppance.
Yeah, she does. She needs her comeuppance. Of course, naturally, the family are going to be really moved by this, right? And they were. So much so that they asked if she was willing to share her story at an unveiling of a memorial statue in his honor. Naturally, she agrees. She goes home. She writes this huge, elaborate, heartfelt speech describing like this completely fictional kind of experience. Then, on the day of the memorial, I guess she realized that she couldn't actually bring herself to stoop that low. So at the last minute, she fakes a panic attack and she convinces Linda to get up and read the speech for her.
I have no words.
Mental. Following the speech, this was enough for a New York Times reporter called David Dunlap to want to find out more about this amazing woman who had not only survived, but was thriving and doing so much to help other survivors in this incredible network. David, of course, he reaches out to Tania. At first, she agrees to speak with him, assuming the piece would focus on the group as a whole. She figured that she would basically just be able to blend in the background. But when she realizes that the main focus was going to be on her, she worries that this could potentially bring some unwanted scrutiny towards her. And she starts coming up with all these different excuses to avoid talking to him. Naturally, David's a journalist. He smells a rat straight away. Why is this woman all of a sudden reluctant? As a result, Tania gets some of the other members of the group to call him up and tell him to just drop the story. But this only, again, heightens his suspicions. So while he had them on the phone, he gathered as much information about Tania as he possibly could from them. They, too, began to grow suspicious. For a start, why was Tania so desperate to avoid him? After all, she'd always been more than willing to share their story with them, right? Why was a journalist any different? When they questioned her, she said that the memorial for Wells had just started to trigger her PTSD. So she was sensing basically that the walls are now closing in on her.
Yeah. And now she's like, oh no, I'm having a panic attack.
This is when Tania told Linda that her brother had just died from cancer and that she needs to go to California to be with her family. In reality, she was simply trying to lay low until David gave up. But of course, David wasn't going to let this drop. So with the little information that he did manage to pry out of the other members, he began fact-checking her story. He discovers that even though Tania tells everyone that she graduated from Harvard and Stanford, there was never a record of her ever attending either university.
Okay.
Strike number one.
Why would you ever say that you graduated for Harvard?
Next, she claimed that she was working for Merrill Lynch in the South Tower at the time of the attack. But again, with very little effort, David finds out that not only was this untrue, but Merrill Lynch didn't even have an office in either the North or the South Tower at the time.
That's some really poor research there, Tania.
But the thing is, what's wild to me is that this actually shows how misinformation can deeply influence our collective memory, because I distinctly remember hearing that a lot of Merrill Lynch employees died in the collapse of the towers. And I know that I'm not alone in this. So it's kind of the sort of Mandela effect. This is like a psychological phenomenon where a large group of people collectively misremember a specific detail about an event.
I guess I would just assumed because it's just a big financial institution in the towers.
Well, actually, it's a little more complicated than that. Tania isn't actually the only person to have lied about being a 9/11 survivor. There's a bunch of people out there. There was this guy called Steve Ranazizi. He's basically a TV actor and a comedian. And for years, he was telling people that he was working for Merrill Lynch in the World Trade Center and he'd narrowly escaped with his life. And his story was extremely public. But eventually in 2015, someone pointed out that Merrill Lynch didn't even have an office in the World Trade Center. It seems the reason why many people remember this detail about Merrill Lynch is because fraudsters were unknowingly pigging off each other's stories.
That's hilarious.
So these details then end up embedding themselves into the mainstream until they feel like facts. So it makes you wonder, whose lie came first? Did Tania hear Steve's account and borrow from him, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, what did Merrill Lynch say about this?
I don't think they ever came forward. Like, oh, did we have an office in the South Tower?
Something.
Steve, did we have an office in the South Tower? Did we? Oh, you don't know? Brad? Oh, we did. Oh, because you heard it from Steve Razanesi. Oh, okay. Oh, and Tania Head? Oh, she was one of our employees. Great. Yeah, we must have done. Yeah.
Why would there people make up that? Yeah, that's just weird, isn't it?
It's so messed up. So while Tania is away, Linda does her best to try and deflect David's questions. But eventually, it gets to the point where she just can't do it anymore. She begs Tania just to provide just some kind of proof, anything that she was actually there. She suggests that maybe Tania share the name of the woman whose wedding ring she supposedly returned, or reveal the name of the fireman who rolled her under the truck, right? A lot of people connected with their rescuers in the aftermath. She didn't seem to know these people's names. But every time this came up, Tania just reacts in the same way. She spirals into this panic attack just to try and avoid answering any questions. So it becomes very clear that Tania's reluctance to speak to the media might be because she's hiding something.
Her pants are on fire.
Yes. So to get around this, she starts telling everyone that it's because she isn't a US citizen and worries that talking to journalists might lead to her deportation if the truth ever came out.
It's not under Trump at this point in time.
I mean, she is a Spanish citizen. I think that she's just there on like maybe a visa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe a tourist visa that she has to maybe renew every 90 days. It probably explains why she said that she went off to Hurricane Katrina or to the tsunami relief. She's probably going back to Spain and then coming back into the country because you have to leave after like 90 days or something like that.
Yeah, but then you can't return for like a good number of days afterwards.
No, I think you can.
Okay.
I think you just have to leave the country and then come back.
Okay.
So thinking that she's helping, Tania's friend Janice suggests meeting with her lawyer to explore legal options for protection just in case kind of immigration come after her. Of course, she's now backed herself into a corner, so she can't exactly say no because that's going to seem really shady as hell, right? Like, you're so worried about being deported. Why won't you come speak to this lawyer? It's free.
Yeah. And this must be wasting just a lot of her time because she must have better things to do. No, I guess not. Actually,
No,
you're right.
She doesn't have a job.
Yeah.
So Janice takes Tania to see a lawyer. And while Janice waits outside, this lawyer, within 2 hours, unpicks every single one of Tania's lies. Just like that.
Amazing.
Eventually, the lawyer calls Janice in and says, look, here's the thing. She never worked for Merrill Lynch. She never met this guy called Dave. Her name isn't even Tanya.
What?
Meet Alicia. And she's never, ever set foot in the World Trade Center towers apart from visiting Ground Zero.
Wow.
Just like that.
And Janice is like, well, yeah, how do you do? He's good. He's a good lawyer.
Yeah, I think it might be a woman.
She's a good lawyer. Sorry. I was thinking of Harvey from The Suits.
It's because we've been watching it on loop for the last 4 weeks.
I shouldn't assume. My bad.
And then what do you think happens next?
I reckon Janice is going to go tell all of her friends.
Yeah, Adam, they just leave. Tanya is in a complete state of shock that all her lies, of course, have now been exposed. Janice, meanwhile, completely silent. Her mind is just racing. She's trying to process everything that she just learned. And they just walk and they walk and they walk. And eventually they reach a point where they have to part ways. And Tanya's like, okay, thanks, Janice. This is my stop. And she heads off home.
Did she not like protest and say like, no, it did happen. This, that, and the other?
Doesn't seem like it. Of course, Janice, she's furious. So along with Linda, they start contacting all the members of the Survivor Network to let them all know that Tanya is a fraud. And many of them don't believe it. After all, she's helped so many of these people piece their lives back together, right? She means a lot to these people. And I suppose they're a bit like Janice when she first heard it. Like she's just replaying everything in her head, like coming to terms with what just happened. Like it takes a while.
Wow.
So eventually the board holds a vote and Tanya is kicked out of the Survivors Network that very same day. And in a way, I'm actually kind of glad that someone from the inside of the group uncovered all of this rather than it being splashed across the press. Like these are vulnerable people, Adam. And I think it would have been a much bigger blow to the network if the press had broken that story before they had a chance to grapple with what had happened, because what a massive betrayal. So, of course, it doesn't take long for the media to get wind of this revelation. The very next day, The Times breaks a story and she becomes a global headline. It turns out that Tanya's real name is Alicia Steve Head, and she grew up in Barcelona in a very, very wealthy family, like the type that send their kids to finishing schools in Switzerland. The family's hobbies included things like playing tennis, playing polo, which explains how she was able to donate so much of her own money to the network.
And why she didn't need to work?
Yeah, for the last 6 years, she'd been telling everyone that she worked full time, but in truth, she wasn't even eligible to work in the United States.
That's what I was thinking. Like, if she's only there on like a part-time visa.
A bit like Anna Delvey, because she had to leave the country every 90 days.
Was she even in America at the time of 9/11?
Nope. She didn't arrive in New York until 2003.
Has anyone interviewed her in terms of why? Why did you do it?
Well, we're going to come on to that.
Okay.
The answer is no.
Damn it.
Of course, the press managed to track down a bunch of her old friends, and they all describe Alicia as very much the person that Tanya was pretending to be. Very generous, very funny, extremely likable. But they also said that she was always a compulsive liar. You know, the kind of teenage stuff kids do. They recall her telling stories like, I've got this boyfriend and he's so handsome and he really wants to marry me. But then I've got this other boyfriend and he's so rich and he wants to marry me too. And like, what's a girl to do, you know? Like,
rolling their eyes like, all right, Alicia.
That's the thing though. Many of them learned that from very early on not to waste their time calling her out on her lies, because she would just go through this really exhaustive process of trying to convince you that she was telling the truth. And if that didn't work, she would then get aggressive. So over time, they just became conditioned to just smile and nod and let the lies just wash over them.
And they should have probably just cut her out.
The world also learned that as a teenager, she participated in an exchange program to the USA where she basically falls in love with the country. And this is when she decides that this is where she wanted to live. They also learned that in the late 1990s, her father and her brother got caught up in this huge political scandal back in Spain involving dodgy deals, resulting in them basically stealing 24 million euros from the government. At the time, of course, this attracted a huge amount of negative press for their family. And so Alicia, along with her other members of her family, they decide to lay low and they start cutting ties with all of their friends. That takes us to essentially 2003, when she completely vanishes from her old life. And we know that this is when she goes to the USA and begins building this new life as Tanya. And soon after this, she stumbles upon these 9/11 support groups. She does as much research about the members and their backstories as she can. And she just becomes seduced by this overwhelming sympathy and sense of community they appear to be getting.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just something that just built up and up and up. I wonder when she went into this, didn't envisage being like the leader of this network or whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone does, right? Because you're literally putting yourself in the lion's den, and you only put yourself in the lion's den if what's in the center of that den is something that you really, really want.
Yeah. She's just, I don't know, toying with the idea, kind of, I don't know, daydreaming, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then she just starts to appreciate this attention.
Yeah. And of course, from there, Tania crafts her own elaborate tale, which becomes essentially her ticket into these communities. And I think this tells us something about her motivation. Like, she craved acceptance and love, which she fully leans into, assuming that no one would ever unpick her lies, right? Because these are vulnerable people. For 6 years, no one ever questioned it. It was someone outside of the group that knew better, that basically exposed her.
But then if her friends growing up didn't really challenge her or had stopped challenging her, had she just thought that she could get away with it?
Possibly, like a sort of arrogance, right?
Yeah.
Sort of confidence. So, again, I'm feeling very Natalie Imbruglia.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you know?
Actually, no, I'm not torn.
Why?
No, I think she's done bad. I don't care how much good she's done. Someone else that was involved could have done equally as much as good if they were given the chance.
Yes, but what she does is terrible. It's unimaginable. It's cruel. She's preying on the vulnerabilities of others, but at the same time, she is also incredibly lonely and desperate for connection as well. So do you not feel sympathy on that side of things? I'm playing devil's advocate here.
I don't know if I do. I feel, like I say, there's so many other things you can go and do, communities you can join. This isn't one that you go and try and push your way into the limelight. This is like one of the biggest and worst things to ever happen. No.
Interesting. So while I was researching this, I came across some really interesting observations from people online suggesting that someone like Tania showing up was almost inevitable, given how 9/11 has essentially become its own industry. They basically say in the aftermath of 9/11, you now have things like the TSA, you have this increased demand for security technologies, like there's changes in legislation that have reshaped the way that people communicate and do business across the world. But closer to home, at ground zero, you see these regular anniversaries and these monuments that attract ticketed sales. There are countless books and there's documentaries and there's films being produced about this event, right? So if you look at it through that lens, it's almost inevitable that chances like Tania would be drawn to this. Don't get me wrong, it's disgusting, but does this help us understand a bit more about her mindset and her motivations? Another way to look at it is that some survivors describe 9/11 as like the sort of religion. Survivors and victims' families have come to hold this sacred status in American society, almost like modern day kind of saints, if you will. For Tania, her story allowed her to claim one of these revered positions amongst them. So as a survivor, people look at her like, wow, you've really been through it, right? You are one of those symbols of our country's most desperate moments, and you were at the center of that. And of course, in the aftermath of the attacks, this also gave rise to support groups that in many ways resemble religious communities, offering identity, purpose, a sense of belonging as a survivor, much like a church, right? And then, of course, you've got all the rituals tied to 9/11 remembrance. Ground Zero has become kind of this sacred temple where people can come together bound by their horrific experience. And I'm not saying this excuses her actions, but this might shed some light on her motivations as to why she decided to do this, right?
Don't know if I agree. I don't know if we know enough about who she really is to know her full motivation. Like, is there actually something sadder at play in terms of her mental state? Or is it just someone that was jumping on the bandwagon like some of these other survivors just wanting to be a part of history? I don't know.
I completely agree. There has to be some kind of mental thing going on. I'm not necessarily saying like I agree with any of those two assertions. I'm just telling you what other people have said online, because they're also trying to grapple with this thing that's very confusing, right? People can't really understand where she's coming from or why she would want to do this.
I think it's because it almost feels alien to a lot of people. It's really hard to probably relate or resonate with how she's feeling or whatever.
Yeah, we're just desperately trying to understand, basically.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think that's why it's really difficult just to know why I should even do all this. But I guess someone that is wealthy, that has all this time, but maybe feels not connected, has felt the need to always come up with stories to fit in this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Possibly explains a bit, but I don't know. I feel like the amount that she lied and the length she went to, surely she must have at one point gone, have I taken this too far? Yeah.
So the story's out. The world knows. She's a global headline. There is this documentary filmmaker and also a 9/11 survivor. His name is Angelo. Now, he was very close to Tania. In fact, a while before her lies were exposed, it was Tania who was pushing him forward with making this documentary. And for ages, he was struggling to kind of secure funding. Eventually, Tania decided to step in and commission him, saying that she will pay him whatever he needs, right? It's through this project that Angelo's documentary ends up having all this incredible footage of her looking directly into the camera, spilling all of these lies. And the only reason she agreed to let him film her in the first place was because she believed that she could control the edit since she was the one commissioning it.
But I'm guessing, obviously, once it comes out, she doesn't, or she can't.
Yeah, so the documentary hasn't been made just yet, right?
Oh.
Her story has just come out. They've already recorded a lot of the footage for this documentary. On the day that the story breaks in the Times, Angelo visits Tania. He's the only person that she's willing to even speak to. She's, of course, devastated, completely shaken, and Angelo tells her that he wants to give her a chance to tell her story, her real story, not the fabricated one that she'd shared during their initial filming. And she agrees. She says she absolutely will, but just not today. I'm too upset. Then, just like that, she disappears.
Back to Spain?
Probably back to Spain. Yeah, she completely abandons her apartment in New York and all of her belongings. And after that, she ends up sending a bunch of emails to the other members of the group from a Spanish email account. And it just contains one word, and that is the word hello. So she's clearly hoping to get them to start speaking to her again so that she can start manipulating them, essentially. Unfortunately, they all decide that the best thing for us to do is just block the shit out of her.
Yeah, mark as spam.
Yeah, mark as spam, which I think is the right call. Then, when nobody falls for that, she starts sending really abusive messages saying, shame on you for not forgiving Tania after everything that she's done for you. Then a message comes through saying, Tania has killed herself because you abandoned her and you should all be ashamed of yourselves.
Well, one, Tania isn't real, and assuming she's referring to this metaphorical person.
Alicia.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the documentary, there is a real mix of emotions from people. Like, some people have this sense of compassion for her, while others are just filled with complete and utter hate and contempt for what she did. But they do agree, either strongly or loosely, that she did bring something into their lives that was positive. So it's such a crazy story. It's so tricky. I suppose to someone on the outside, they might be able to acknowledge the good that she did despite the awful lies. But to someone on the inside, an actual 9/11 survivor, who at their most vulnerable, having someone fabricate lies and capitalize on one of the worst experiences that they've gone through in their entire lives. So for those that hate her, honestly, I don't really blame them.
Yeah, I think the closer you got to her and experienced her, I think the more angry you would be.
That's right.
Yeah.
The closer, that's a perfect way of summarizing it. The closer you were to her, the worse it was. The further away, you can probably kind of see some wiggle room.
Yeah, you haven't been betrayed yourself.
So if you want to know more, I will link to David Dunlap's expose that was initially released back in 2017. I'll also link to the 2008 documentary, The 9/11 Faker, which is also on YouTube. I'll also link to some of Angelo's work. So he's done two things. He's written a book in 2012 called The Woman Who Wasn't There, along with, of course, that infamous documentary where he recorded some of that great footage of her literally lying to us on camera.
How is he allowed to release that? I guess...
Was she going to sue for defamation?
Yeah, fair point.
And the thing is, though, that documentary is just amazing. The ending is very good because in the last shot of the documentary, Angelo, by coincidence, spots Tania in Midtown in 2011, just after the 10th anniversary. So, of course, she obviously couldn't resist attending. He approaches her with a camera and she just ends up chasing him off. So the very final shot of the documentary is her wiggling her finger at the camera, looking very aggressive. So what's really interesting is that it's that one single moment, that glimpse of the real Tania, like the veneer is slipped.
Yeah.
Really brilliant way of ending it. After Angelo's documentary came out in 2012, an insurance company in Spain issued a press release saying that Tania Head had been let go. So it looks like she won't be escaping from her past anytime soon. And Adam, that's all we know. No one's seen her. We don't know where she is. She's probably living in Spain somewhere. Like, she's probably not going to come back into New York anytime soon. She does seem to be coming here for some anniversaries, but she's certainly not living here.
You say here. We're not in New York.
Oh, yeah, sorry. In the United States.
Wow, you just wanted to make yourself a part of the story.
It's a home away from home. And Adam, that is the story of Tania Head, the woman who wasn't there.
never existed
Yeah.
in the first place. I can't believe I didn't even know about this beforehand. I feel like I should have known about this. Wow.
What did you learn today?
I learned that if I had some money, I could literally create my own character
Yeah.
and write myself into history before being chased out of it.
Don't do that. Should we run the outro this week?
Let's do it.
And that wraps up another journey into the fascinating and intriguing on the Compendium. If today's episode tickled your curiosity, then don't forget to hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting app. It makes a world of difference when you do. For our diehard listeners, next week's episode is waiting for you right on our Patreon, and it's completely free of charge. If you're hungry for more, you can join our Certified Freaks tier to unlock our entire archive and enjoy exclusive content and get sneak peeks of what's coming up next. We'd love you to join our growing community. New episodes drop every Tuesday, and until then, remember, trust is precious, but so is the pursuit of truth. See you next time.
See ya.